Hi guys, welcome back to my channel once again. This is Battle with Ola. My name is Mujela Oluwa. Today I want to talk about a topic that I love so much, and I love it because I believe that it was one of those topics that I got immediately, was taught to me, and I read about it. It was one of those topics that I easily understood. So I want to talk about it today, and more especially because I just saw a movie where it was practiced in real life. I've seen tons of movies like that, but this one just reminded me that I had to do this video. So today I'm going to be talking about identification parade, ID parade for short. Identification parade is a process used by the police during their investigation to ascertain if the victim or a witness in a crime can recognize the offender or the suspect in that crime. It makes the work of the police easier if the person can recognize the suspects. Just makes their work very easy. And it was done, not the first time it was done, but the one that really caught my attention was in Brooklyn Nine-Nine. The episode is titled DFW, and Jake Peralta was trying to identify a murder suspect. The victim's sister told them that the suspect was singing a Backstreet Boys song. So Jake told all the suspects on the lineup to sing the song. So one person will start one line, the other person will go on and go on until one of them sang, and the witness could recognize that this is the person that murdered or killed our brother. So the suspect was identified. So like I said, why is identification parade needed or useful? It is done, one, to charge a suspect with an offense; two, to test the witness ability to identify the offender or the suspect; and three, to avoid mistaken identity. There are some instances when ID parade is needed. In some other instances, it might not be necessary. One, where the identity of the suspect is in doubt, you need an ID parade. Two, where the witness did not know the offender or the suspect before the commission of that crime, no prior knowledge, you need an ID parade. Makes it easier to identify the suspect without any prior bias, or any prior, information or misinformation. Three, where the victim was confronted by the offender. Now, the victim of the crime was confronted by the offender for a short period of time, or by the witness for a short period of time, So it's not as if they had such a long rapport or interaction, but just for a short period of time. You need an ID parade for them to recall what they saw of the offender or suspect. Four, where the victim could not see the features of the offender clearly. For instance, in the case that I cited, she could only remember that he was singing a song, so she could identify him by his voice. In some other instances, it could be maybe by the way the person moved. Another instance where ID parade would be needed would be where the victim could not see the suspect or the offender clearly. For instance, if there was no light, like the instance that I gave the other time in Brooklyn Nine-Nine, the victim could only recognize the suspect because he was singing when he was committing the offense. So she remembered the song and could identify the song and the tone and the voice of the person singing, but she did not have any other clue as to what it looks like exactly, until an ID parade was done and she could fish him out by, the tone and the voice. So those are instances where ID parade might be needed, and that it could be that maybe there was no light, so you could only see scanty features, of the suspect or the offender. So maybe, for instance, there was no light, and the witness or victim could only see scanty features of the suspect. An ID parade would also come in handy. So those are the instances. Now let's talk about when it's not necessary. One, where the offender was caught at the scene of crime, you would not need an ID parade because the police already knows what he looks like. Two, where the offender was well known to the victim or the witness before committing the crime, there will be no need for ID parade because they already have sufficient information as to the identity of the suspect. Three, when the offender has an alibi, the police would instead investigate the alibi and would not need to do an identification parade because he has an alibi. I'll talk about an alibi or what alibis mean or connote in criminal investigation in another video, but it's also a very easy area that I love to talk about. So, but an alibi, if an offender has an alibi, an ID parade would not be necessary. Where the eyewitness saw the commission of crime, most likely he or she would have seen the person who committed the crime, so you would not need an ID parade in that instance. Where the witness saw the accused person committing the crime and immediately arrested him or prevented him from escaping before the police came and took him away, an ID parade would be absolutely unnecessary. So those are instances where you would not need to do an ID parade. So how is an ID parade done? An ID parade is done by lining up the suspect with, other similar looking people, maybe people of similar, not the same. Now, I always say that nullum simile est idem, nothing similar is the same. So, but the police would line up. They usually have a lineup room in police stations. It's a standard requirement for, standard police stations, a lineup room where offenders and suspects can be lined up for ID parade. So the suspect is usually lined up with other similar looking or people of similar features, for the ID parade to be conducted. And when an ID parade is conducted, only authorized persons are allowed to be present. So usually they would be on the outside looking through probably a glass, a see-through, but not a hear-through glass, while the suspects will be on the other side. And then the policeman would have given the witness or the victim a clue as to, once you see the suspect, point at him or make a sound or tell me what he did, or maybe if they are singing, when you hear the voice or the tone of the suspect, just tell me so that we can fish him out. So they would have discussed all that prior to the ID parade. But essentially, it's important for you to know a few things. The first is that only the witness and the victim's lawyer and the police are allowed in an ID parade. They're the ones allowed to be present, for the identification, the exercise. Aside the suspect and other similar looking people that will be lined up with him. That's one. The second thing is that suspect will be notified that an ID parade is about to be conducted, or he is about to be lined up for an ID parade, and he will fill police form D48. He will fill police form D48. The suspect has to be lined up with at least 8 other similar looking persons, people of similar height, similar stature, similar appearance, probably similar race or color, similar age, 8 persons for one suspect and 12 persons for 2 suspects. So where the suspects are 2 in number, 12 persons are lined up with them. Now another thing, maybe the third or fourth now, is that the suspect must not be in handcuffs, must be free of handcuffs, and must not be wearing any prior clothing. No prior clothing, just to ensure, the veracity and, the credibility and integrity of the ID parade, and so as not to inform any unnecessary bias that will lead to a wrong conclusion on the part of the police and, the witness or the victim. The suspect must not be wearing any prior clothing. Another thing is that the suspect must not be moved alone from cell to cell. Like when the police is moving him from his holding cell, maybe to the lineup room or from anywhere within the police station, he must not be moved alone, so that the victim would not wrongfully identify him, or so that the integrity of the test would not be compromised before the test is actually carried out, the ID parade I mean. So he must not be moved alone from cell to cell within the police station. The suspect can also stand wherever he wants in the line. So because they will be lined up in a straight line, he can say, I want to stand as the 3rd person or the 8th person, but he can stand anywhere he wants on the line. Another thing is that he's allowed to actually look at the other people that are, lined up with him. He's allowed to look at them. The victim or the witness must not be shown a picture of the suspect or any prior description given to them. That is, the police or anyone cannot describe the suspect to them, because they are assumed to have had minimal interaction with the suspect. So they are only to act on that information to identify the suspect in the lineup. They must not be shown a picture or describe to what the suspect looks like. So the police cannot say this is the kind of person we are looking for. You can't tell the victim that as a police officer conducting the ID parade. Rather, the victim or the witness must be allowed to identify or ID the person, the suspect, themselves independently. Also, where there are more than one witness for an ID parade, each ID parade must be conducted per witness, separately. So you can't bring 4 witnesses or 4 victims and say, point at the person. What can happen in that situation is that someone will point at one suspect and the other will be swayed and say, this is the person, when it might not be the person. So in a bid to ensure the accuracy and, the integrity of the parade or the test, an ID parade must be conducted for each witness individually. So one witness identify your suspect, go. Another witness identify your suspect, go. Then another witness come in and identify your suspect. So individually. Another thing is that the suspect must not be shown to the witness before the ID parade. Also, the victim must have been told prior to the ID parade how to identify the suspect. That is, okay, make a sound, make a sign, do this, do that when you have identified the suspect that we're looking for. That's another thing. Then ID parades are supposed to be recorded and videoed. And after the ID parade, the suspect will fill police form D49, stating that he's satisfied with the conduct of the ID parade or not satisfied. And then the police officer will fill form D50, stating whether or not the victim could identify the suspect and the words of identification that, oh, the victim said, this is the man that killed my friend, or the victim said, this is the girl that robbed our house. So that must be recorded in form D50, and that is how ID parades are conducted. ID parades, as part of the evidence put forward by the police as part of their investigation in charging a suspect to court or bringing, an offender to justice, is admissible in court as part of evidence. But factors that may affect the evidential value or the weight attached to it might be if, for instance, the witness or the victim picked different wrong persons before eventually picking the right person, or if there was police interference in how, the victim or the witness identified the offender. But in any case, it's an integral part of police investigation or criminal investigation. And it helps the police to, identify the offender faster and quicker on the evidence and assistance of the victim or witness. So that's all I have for you in this episode. I will see you in my very next episode. Don't forget to subscribe. Toodles.